make his decision by looking at the horizon. This is admittedly on manual control a rather haphazard or difficult process, and this is what accounted in large part for the overflight of Scott Carpenter on his maneuver. So the really critical moment in this flight, as it stands right now, is going to be in the hands of Gordon Cooper's getting his capsule in the right yaw position at the exact mark from John Glenn on the retrofire order.
And let's hope, Chuck, that dramatic moment will not be followed by an equally long and excessively painful period of silence, which you and I remember so well in the final stage of the Carpenter flight. We'll be back to continue our report on the flight of the Faith 7 after this message from Newsweek magazine.
Today, a pleasant day in May 1963. Somewhere in the blackness of space, a brave man helps to bring mankind closer to the planets. In a strife-torn part of our own land in Alabama, other resolute men help to bring us closer to human understanding. Elsewhere in the world, men hope, plot, fight, triumph. This is the world that Newsweek magazine brings before you every week. The facts of this world are those in which we plan our own lives and living. For this reason, Newsweek's editors are careful to separate facts from opinions, because they feel that you are mature enough to make up your own mind, to determine your own course of action. If this is the kind of person you truly are, perhaps Newsweek is the news weekly you should be reading. Why not begin reading Newsweek this week?
You know, Chuck, it's ironic that the flight of astronaut Cooper, the longest manned space flight ever conducted by an American, should end on this rather grim note, because up until now, Cooper's performance has really been exceptional. That's become increasingly apparent in all the reports that we've had from Mercury Control. I'm sure you noticed, as I did, that in the early stages of the flight, the officials were cautious and restrained in their comments, as they always have been. But as the flight progressed, their enthusiasm grew, and so did their enthusiastic comments. They became increasingly excited and encouraging about the progress of the flight, and they began saying, for example, that astronaut Cooper was writing a new textbook. Here's Colonel Powers.
Astronaut Gordon Cooper has been talking to our tracking station at Zanzibar. While in contact with Zanzibar, he received a review of his procedures and got into a discussion of some inverters on board. Here again, we are not sure we understand all that he has said thus far, but we are working on the problem right now. In any event, we have the recording of the pilot voice exchange with the tracking station and are prepared to play it at this time. This is Mercury Control. Over to the tape.
Roger, stand by, John. We'll be back to you after the Zanzibar pass.
Visor is closed. The visor is not closed at the moment.
I'm afraid we had better not continue with that tape conversation of Cooper's talk with the Zanzibar tracking station. It doesn't sound good enough for air. However, this is the first time that Powers has mentioned a new problem, which may or may not be a problem, that of a problem involving some inverters on board the Mercury spacecraft. Exactly what significance this has, it's impossible to say at the moment. And right now, of course, we're all concerned with the problem that we do know about, the failure of part of the automatic control system on board the spacecraft, which will make it necessary for Cooper to bring his Faith 7 down out of orbit by manual procedures.
Dallas, so one thing we might mention here for our audience, because things start happening fast and furiously during their reentry run, something they just might be listening for from Shorty Powers and Mercury Control, is the ionization blackout that occurs when the spacecraft meets the heavy temperatures on the reentry run. If this ionization blackout occurs on schedule, if our audience should hear Colonel Powers say that the blackout came on schedule, then the chances are that the splash is going to be in the ballpark. It's going to be close to the recovery area. In the case of Scott Carpenter, his ionization blackout occurred 40 seconds after it was supposed to begin. This was the first clear indication that the men in the Mercury Control Center had that there had been an overflight. So if we hear that the ionization blackout comes on time, it's a good sign. If it should come early or late, it means he's either undershot or overshot.
The blackout in itself is nothing to be alarmed about, and it doesn't last long, about 4 minutes, and it's caused simply by the sudden arrival of the Mercury spacecraft in this ionized layer, which cuts off all communication to and from the spacecraft for about 4 or 5 minutes. But as you say, in the case of Carpenter, the blackout came late, and it was followed by another unscheduled blackout. The blackout that continued until that dramatic moment when Shorty Powers said that a search plane had spotted a life raft, and in it was a gentleman named Carpenter.
That was a moment none of us will ever forget. I'm sure that Colonel Powers, who always does a good job in Mercury Control, this time will make darn sure, though, after the ionization blackout on the reentry run, as to whether there's been any even brief telemetry data coming in after the blackout. You may recall on the case of Carpenter, we spent a couple of agonizing hours wondering if the pilot was all right, when most of the people in the blockhouse knew that they had some telemetry data indicating that Carpenter had survived the reentry run. I think they had about 34 seconds of data. Apparently nobody passed this word on to the voice of Mercury Control, Colonel Powers, and as a result we all had an unnecessary, uncomfortable period. So I think this does point out one thing, Dallas, the fact that on every one of these flights we do learn something. I'm sure that Gordon Cooper, getting into the proper attitude position now manually, also will benefit greatly by his conversations with Scott Carpenter, who was the first man to actually have to face this situation in flight.
Another point that ought to be mentioned, the importance of the correct re-entry attitude. The spacecraft must come down with the heat shield down. If it's tumbling out of control, then of course it will face unbearable heat temperatures as it comes down through the atmosphere, temperatures which go up to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
And of course, Dallas, this is another reason why the pilot must have a reasonable supply of hydrogen peroxide on board even after retro fire, because with that fuel he can in some ways stabilize the attitude of his spacecraft during the reentry run. In case it should be slightly out of position at retrofire, he can do something about it to correct it anyway. If he should be empty or near empty on fuel, why then he has, of course, a very serious problem.
No doubt you were reminded, just as I was this afternoon when we first heard about the premature lighting of the O5G light, of the false signal that came into Mercury Control during the final stage of the Glenn flight last February 1962. That indicated that his heat shield had deployed prematurely, which would have caused a catastrophe. It had happened before he came down through the heaviest part of the atmosphere, because it would have exposed his craft to those 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit temperatures.
On that occasion, John Glenn said after his landing, I'm sure you recall, Dallas, that it was the understatement of the year that had that heat shield actually deployed, it would have been a bad day for all of us.
Yes, indeed.
It certainly would have been for the pilot.
Yes. Just one other note on that. That was the reason that Mercury gave Glenn the order not to release his retro rocket package, but to leave it attached to the base of the heat shield as an extra precaution. As it turned out, the signal light in Mercury Control was incorrect. The heat shield had not deployed, but the rocket package remained attached to it all the way down.
One bit of information we have not had from Mercury Control, and we might be anticipating, is the fact that Gordon Cooper has on board some stimulants which he may take to make sure that he's really on top of his job, but when that critical retro moment comes. Unlike the other pilots, Gordo's been up there for many, many hours now, and even though he apparently did have a pretty good night's sleep in the hostile environment of space, nevertheless, I would assume that he is a rather tired young test pilot right now, and it just may be, knowing that he is faced now with a problem that he had not anticipated, that he has actually consumed these stimulants, dexedrine, I believe it is, yes.
That's right. Somebody asked Colonel Powers about that point some hours ago, just after Cooper had wakened up after 7.5 hours sleep, and it had been suggested that perhaps he would take some dexedrine right then to make sure he was fully awake for the remainder of the flight. Colonel Powers said he was pretty sure that Cooper had not taken any stimulant, but perhaps, as you say, perhaps he will feel the need of it right now. We'll continue with our report on the flight of Faith 7 after this message from the Schick Safety Razor Company.
With the new Schick razor blade, you really got it made. You'll get more shaves than ever with the stainless steel blade. You'll get more shaves than ever with the stainless steel blade. So get the new Schick razor blade, you'll really have it made. double edger injector. Mister, take your pick. Get long-lasting stainless steel blades by Schick.
You've heard about them, now Schick has them. Stainless steel blades that last and last. Schick's new stainless steel blades give you an unbelievable number of shaves per blade. Smoother, more comfortable shaves. Double edge or injector, they're precision made by the Schick Safety Razor Company. Get new Schick stainless steel blades today.
Double edger injector, Mister, take your pick. Get long-lasting stainless steel blades by Schick.
Right now, astronaut Gordon Cooper is making his final pass as he prepares to come out over the Pacific Ocean. He's somewhere in the Bay of Bengal, over the Bay of Bengal at the moment, and within a few minutes he should be in contact with Capcom John Glenn aboard the Coastal Sentry Quebec, the command ship located off the southeast coast of Japan, and Glenn will then give him a verbal countdown to the firing of the retro rockets. He got those instructions from Glenn in a conversation which they had during his last pass in the vicinity of the CSQ. He was ordered to put his craft in the retro fire attitude using fly-by-wire. He was ordered to listen for a verbal countdown from Glenn on the firing of the retro rockets. He will then fire the rockets manually, and he will make visual references out of the window to make sure that he is in the correct retro rocket attitude. After that, he will jettison the retro rocket package manually, and he will also assume the re-entry attitude manually. As soon as the 05G builds up, that is the start of gravity stress, after that the sequence will be automatic. But as Shorty Powers said, young Mr. Cooper has a little bit of a chore on his hands, a chore which he will be performing very shortly. And after that, after the retro rockets fire and the capsule begins to come down out of orbit into the atmosphere, it should splash down in the Pacific about 80 miles southeast of Midway Island at around 6:25 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, about 36 minutes from now. That is the latest estimate from Mercury Control on the end of the flight of Faith 7. Up until now, up until this problem developed in the electrical automatic control system, the flight had been going extremely well, far better than anybody had expected. Cooper's consumption of oxygen was lower than expected, also his consumption of electrical power. We don't know how much food he's eaten or how much water he has drunk, but the suggestion is that there, too, the consumption has been lower than was expected. All in all, it's been a textbook flight, perhaps a little more than that. And Cooper, all the way through, has sounded extremely confident, buoyant, gay, and sometimes rather jovial, but in a laconic sort of way, I might add. In fact, at one point, Capcom Alan Shepard, who succeeded Wally Schirra as Capcom after Wally Schirra went home for a few hours' rest, Capcom Alan Shepard suggested to Cooper that he was being something of a miser with his consumables. Now, we're going to pause briefly for the benefit of our stations around the country so that they can identify themselves. We'll be back in just a minute. Right now, this is Dallas Townsend at Cape Canaveral.
You gotta meet up with the dependables, move up with the dependables, move out with the dependables built by Dodge.
Dodge sales are up 65% so far this model year. A lot of people are going for Dodge because Dodge has a lot going for people. A lot of comfort, a lot of power, a lot of good looks.
You spot a car, youthful and smart, stylish kind of car, style that takes your heart. It's no Mirage. You have flipped for a 63 Dodge. You gotta meet up with the dependables, move up with the dependables, move out with the dependables built by Dodge.
They call them the Dependables because they are.
This is WCBS and WCBS-FM, New York.
This is Dallas Townsend at Cape Canaveral with the CBS News coverage of the flight of Faith 7, brought to you by the Schick Safety Razor Company and Newsweek magazine. The time now at Cape Canaveral is 5:56:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. 5:56 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and within a few minutes, the retro rockets will be firing aboard the spacecraft of astronaut Leroy Gordon Cooper. Gordon Cooper left Cape Canaveral 33 hours and 52 minutes ago. In that time, he has traveled around the world a bit less than 22 times. He has seen 22 sunsets and 22 sunrises. He has had an experience that only 5 other Americans have had before him, and in fact, his experience has lasted a good deal longer than any of them. He long since exceeded the total amount in space of the 5 astronauts who preceded him: Shepard, Grissom, Glenn, Carpenter, and Schirra. The only one of the original 7 astronauts who has not made a space flight is Deke Slayton, and he was disqualified because of a minor physical disability. He is now in charge of the 9 new astronauts, all of whom are here at Cape Canaveral observing the progress of this flight of Mercury Atlas 9. It may be the last of the Mercury series. That point has still not been definitely decided. There have been suggestions that Mercury Atlas 10 might be coming up before long, but D. Brainerd Holmes, director of the Manned Spaceflight Program, who was asked about that just a few hours ago, said it would depend in large part on examination and analysis of the detailed data received from Mercury Atlas 9. After that, of course, assuming that there is no other Mercury program, the United States will move directly into the 2-man Gemini program, and after that, the Apollo lunar program, which is aimed at putting an American on the moon by and probably before 1970. Well, Chuck, here we are in our CBS News trailer at Cape Canaveral with less than 5 minutes to go before the firing of the retro rockets on Cooper's spacecraft over Shanghai.
Dallas, while you've been doing a superb job here wrapping up the situation as it stands right now, I've been sitting back trying to recall just exactly what thoughts were going through my mind a little less than a year ago when Scott Carpenter made his flight from here. It seems to me that on that occasion, there was some speculation after the flight that perhaps Carpenter was not in the proper attitude position in his yaw mode because he had so many things he was asked to do just prior to assuming this position. And I do recall that Carpenter confirmed at his news conference after the flight that he was in fact still pursuing John Glenn's Fireflies at that moment. So I'm sure that at this time the people in Mercury Control are telling Gordon Cooper to forget all about any other chores in that capsule. Just make darn sure that you're on top of your assignment to be in the right yaw position for a retrofire.
Chuck, I understand that Shorty Powers is coming up in just about 5 seconds from now for Mercury Control. So for the very latest on the Cooper flight, let's hear from Shorty Powers.
This is Mercury Control. This is Mercury Control. We have analyzed our information provided by astronaut Gordon Cooper as he passed the Zanzibar tracking station, and we are convinced at this time that the inverters, which supply electrical power to his attitude control system, that is the automatic attitude control system, are both inoperative, both the primary and the alternate. And this means that he will have to perform the entire retro rocket firing and re-entry operation on either fly-by-wire or on manual proportional control. According to our telemetry, he has adequate fuel supply available to both systems to perform the maneuver. The Faith 7 spacecraft is approaching the range of the coastal sentry Quebec. Astronaut John Glenn is prepared to assist Cooper by providing him the countdown for the firing of his retro rockets. We will be attempting to monitor the exchange of conversation between Cooper and Glenn and to keep you posted just as quickly as we can. This is Mercury Control with 33 hours and 56 minutes of the manned orbital spaceflight of Faith 7 now done.
Colonel Powers referred to the fuel amount remaining on board the Faith 7. Just to remind you of that, at last report, he had 60% of his automatic fuel still available and 76% of his manual fuel, so that he should have plenty of fuel available for those adjustments of the spacecraft to make sure that he comes down in the correct attitude. And let's hope at the correct spot in the Pacific for an early pickup. The aircraft carrier Kearsarge, which picked Wally Schirra up from the Pacific in an almost bullseye type of operation last October, is again standing by, and the captain of the Kearsarge, Captain Rankin, hopes to make the same sort of pickup this time, but he said the other day that the chances were 1 in 10,000. At that time, when Schirra came down last October, he was on the deck of the Kearsarge 40 minutes after he hit the surface of the ocean. It would be something of a miracle in view of the last-minute problems that have developed on board Faith 7 if astronaut Cooper could duplicate that feat.
Dallas, one of the things that the spacemen look for most of all in all of these projects, redundancy, now has broken down, at least temporarily, with both those inverters, the prime and the backup, out. And so here is a case where the pilot really is necessary on board. This is going to be a real test for Leroy Gordon Cooper.
Right. The redundancy system also broke down day before yesterday morning, as we all remember, when it turned out that there was no backup diesel engine to move the gantry tower back from the Atlas booster on pad 14, and it took them 2 hours to repair that engine. And even then, they couldn't go because of trouble in the radar computer system at Bermuda. When the flight, there's Colonel Powers.
Astronaut Glenn is in contact with astronaut Cooper. Cooper sounds confident and readily understands all of the instructions he's receiving. We have about 45 seconds till retro fire.
That's the latest from Colonel Powers. He says 45 seconds. He's counting down
4, 3, 2, 1. We have counted down the firing of the retro rockets, and we'll have to await now until Gordon Cooper confirms to us that he feels the retro rockets firing.
That was Colonel Powers. Just a few words from him. The retro rockets should be firing. And the time now in the flight is 33 hours, 59 and a half minutes. It's coming up to 40 hours.
This is Mercury Control. The earlier countdown was to establish firmly his attitude control. We have now counted down the last 10 seconds for retro fire. Astronaut John Glenn indicates on board the Coastal Sentry Quebec that he has an indication of retro. We are standing by for Cooper's signal.
Just an indication that the retro rockets have fired, and apparently they fired at almost the exact moment they should have.
This is Mercury Control. John Glenn has reported that his instrumentation on board the ship indicates that Cooper had his retro firing attitude perfect, and we have confirmed the firing of the retro rockets. I say again, this is Mercury Control. The retro rockets on the Faith 7 spacecraft have fired. John Glenn aboard the Coastal Sentry Queen advises that his instrumentation indicated Gordon Cooper, flying manually, maintained almost precisely exactly the right retro firing attitude.
So Cooper is still performing just as brilliantly at the very end of the flight as he has done throughout it.
Aboard the Coastal Sentry Quebec has advised Gordon Cooper to jettison the retro pack. John Glenn on the CSQ has received a telemetry indication that the retro rockets have jettisoned. This is Mercury Control. The retro rockets on board the Faith 7 have fired. John Glenn confirms it from instrumentation on the CSQ. Gordon Cooper confirms it on board the spacecraft. Cooper has now jettisoned his retro pack from the face of the heat shield.
Those retro rockets have solid fuel on board, and they're small rockets. They give the spacecraft just a little kick, enough of a kick to start pulling it down out of orbit, and of course its drag becomes increasingly heavy as it reaches the thicker atmosphere.
Glenn and Cooper are now talking back and forth with regard to the maintaining of the proper attitude, and from all indications, astronaut Gordon Cooper is flying perfect attitude control.
The re-entry sequence takes about 20 minutes, and from now on, the heat temperatures on board, the heat temperatures on the heat shield of the spacecraft will begin to get considerably higher. The heat shield is composed of a special sort of ablative material which is designed to absorb the heat and sort of peel off gradually, absorbing all the heat and preventing any of it from coming through into the spacecraft itself. John Glenn and Carpenter and Schirra all noticed flames going past their window as they came down through the atmosphere.
Astronauts Cooper and Glenn have been talking back and forth like the veteran test pilots they are. The retro rockets on Phase 7 have fired. The retro rocket pad has been jettisoned. John Glenn on the CSQ has confirmed by his instrumentation and telemetry that Gordon Cooper did fly the proper attitude for the retro rocket firing and has now assumed the proper attitude for re-entry.
This is extremely good news. If he has the proper attitude for re-entry, it means that he will almost certainly come down successfully through the atmosphere and through those 3,000-degree temperatures. At 40,000 feet, the drogue chute, the small chute, should be deployed from the spacecraft. There's some doubt right now as to whether this will be done automatically or manually. I believe, on the basis of the last report from Colonel Powers, that it will have to be done manually. Although...
Control. John Glenn and Gordon Cooper are still in contact. Cooper is maintaining the proper attitude control. In order that you may share with us this operation, we have the tape-recorded transaction between Cooper and Glenn ready to play at this time. This is Mercury Control, over to the tape.
CSQ Capcom, Roger, you sound good. How's that checklist? All complete? Roger, all complete except for squib. All right, how's the window attitude? Check okay? Roger, right on the old That's the way, boy. Okay, our procedure, Gordo, I'll give you a 1-minute hack before retro fire, and then I'll give you a 10-second countdown to what would normally be retro sequence. This time it'll just be a countdown to the 30-second point, and then a 10-second countdown to retro fire, and at the 5 point, I'll tell you to arm squib. Over. Roger, that's fine. Roger. How's your PCO2 doing? Okay, Roger. I'll be entering now. Choose the retros on manual, and I'll re-enter on fly. All right, Roger, okay. I'm looking for lots of experience on this flight. Okay, you're going to get it. 60 seconds to retro sequence. Okay, we got the beginning of the 1-minute period in about 25 seconds here. Roger.
We're listening to a tape conversation between two experienced test pilots, as Shorty Powers calls them, Cooper and Glenn. Glenn aboard the Coastal Century Quebec.
Okay, 1 minute
Cooper
to go
aboard the
on
Faith
my
7.
mark. Okay, 1 minute to go on my mark. Stand by. 30 seconds to retro sequence. You get that? Roger, I got it. Roger, I'll give you a 10-second count here down to the 30-second point. Roger. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The retro sequence. Okay, the next 10-second count will be a countdown to your manual retro, over. All right, Roger. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Retro fire. Roger, a green one here. Roger, how'd your attitude hold, Gordo? Good show, boys. Real fine. They look like they came off right on the money on time. Roger, I think so. Roger, very good. On the next mark, 60 seconds from that retro, you should get us retros. And you'll do that one manually, right? Roger. Got any estimate on your attitude hold and any axis how far you drifted off on retro, over? No, I sure don't. I only probably found John, but I couldn't guess. That's the way to do it. Just too close to tell any error. Good hit. Well, let's try that. Roger, you go ahead and jettison retros any time. And off they came. Roger. We have your signal. I got it. Okay, dealer's choice in re-entry here, fiber wire manual. I think you said, what would you say? You're coming back in fiber wire? Roger, I think so. I come back in fiber wire. Roger, okay, you can hold retro attitude now for a while here if you wanted to hold your attitude more close by holding retro attitude until you get a little closer to 05G. Your 05G was 340919. Just before you get to that, you could come up to your zero re-entry attitude, over. And you could establish roll at that time also. Roger. Rates on zero, John. What was the time on that, establishing that? 340919, over. That's your 05G time. Roger. CSQ Systems, Cape Capcom. Just a little bit before that, you can come on up to 00. CSQ Systems there. Make sure he keeps the rates near zero. Roger.
Well, that was a conversation between John Glenn aboard the Coastal Century Quebec, the command ship off the southern coast of Japan, and astronaut Gordon Cooper. And it was one of the most dramatic tapes we've heard in some time. You could hear them counting together on the countdown, both voices clearly audible on that excellent signal from the Coastal Century Quebec. And Glenn said, good show, right on the money.
Dallas, Dallas, you can certainly differentiate between those two voices, the flat Midwestern accents of John Glenn and the Oklahoma twang of Gordon Cooper up there in orbit. As you say, it was one of the most dramatic tapes we've ever had the privilege of listening to here at Cape Canaveral.
Dramatic also, Chuck, because both of them sounded so completely calm, unconcerned, and so absolutely in full control of themselves.
Much more so than I was, I must confess, Dallas. Incidentally, for the benefit of our audience, in that exchange between Glenn and Cooper, Glenn asked Cooper whether he wanted to go on fly-by-wire or on manual control, and he had the answer fly-by-wire. The reason for that...
This is Mercury Control. Astronaut Gordon Cooper now is re-entering the atmosphere. We have indications from the range tracker, a tracking ship downrange, that the standard blackout period, that is the period when communications are blanked out, occurred within about 2 seconds of the time it was programmed. This means that the re-entry apparently is going on a perfectly nominal or normal basis. We have the balance of the exchange between Cooper and Glenn ready to roll on the tape at this time. This is Mercury Control, over to the tape.
It's been real fine flight, Gordo, real beautiful all the way. Have a full re-entry, will you?
Systems, Cape Flight.
Thank you.
CSQ Systems, Cape Flight. Would you turn his 05G switch fuse to the off position? ASCS 05G switch fuse.
ASCS 05G switch fuse to the off position, is that correct?
Affirmative.
We're listening to a conversation between Cooper and Glenn.
Confirm ASCS 05G switch fuse to the off position, over. Roger, 05G switch fuse to the off position. Roger. Roger.
Well, this has been a conversation between Glenn and Cooper following the firing of the retro rockets.
7, did you have any retro telelight indication, over? CSQ command carrier off.
At about this point, Cooper should be entering the ionization blackout.
They were right on time on our mark here and came up. I think you have our times on them.
Dallas, just to explain before Shorty Powers came in, I was explaining the difference between fly-by-wire and manual. This, of course, is the prerogative of the pilot, which he wants to use. Ordinarily, a pilot uses much less fuel on the fly-by-wire or semi-automatic control mode than he does on manual, which is why Cooper, I'm sure, indicated during the first tape transmission that he was going to go on fly-by-wire to keep his attitude in the proper position during the reentry run. He still, of course, has the prerogative of going back to manual.
Okay, flight train tracker, loud and clear.
We now have word that the carrier Kearsarge has made a sighting of the capsule 100 miles away on radar. Correction, it's now 84 miles away on radar. And perhaps within a few minutes we'll have a report of a visual sighting. That was a radar track of the descending spacecraft Faith 7.
This would certainly indicate, Dallas, that Faith 7 is going to come right down in the bullseye area, in the ballpark, if these radar readings are correct.
So that we may have another extremely fast and successful pickup, just as we did last October with Wally Schirra. Well, we're still waiting word. Cooper is now in the ionization blackout. Here's Colonel Powers.
Voice contact with astronaut Gordon Cooper was established at 17 minutes after the hour from our tracking station in Hawaii. Astronaut Scott Carpenter, the Capcom on Hawaii, is now briefing Gordon Cooper on the weather. I think it's interesting to note that Scotty Carpenter asked Gordon Cooper how he was doing, and the answer was, doing fine. He was also asked whether his altimeter was off the peg. You see, our altimeter only measures altitude up to 100,000 feet. And the answer was, yes, it's off the peg. This means that Faith 7, with Gordon Cooper on board, is now beneath 100,000 feet, and we have just received a bulletin that the drogue parachute has deployed. The drogue parachute has deployed.
He must be well below 100,000 feet now because the drogue is supposed to deploy at a maximum of 40,000 feet. We're waiting a word momentarily from Shorty Powers. He'll be coming in without any warning, so when he starts talking, I will simply stop talking. But it appears perfectly obvious right now that the flight of Faith 7 with astronaut Leroy Gordon Cooper on board is about to come to an extremely successful end.
This is Mercury Control. Astronaut Gordon Cooper has reported the deployment of his drogue parachute at 40,000 feet. He is now being briefed by Scotty Carpenter from Hawaii on the rest of his checklist and procedure. We will be standing by for a report from Gordon Cooper that his main parachute has been deployed shortly. This is Mercury Control standing by and monitoring the conversation between Scotty Carpenter and Gordon Cooper.
Cooper should be hitting the water within 5 minutes.
And you'll be using the phrase textbook flight about this one again, I'm sure, Dallas, at this point. It's certainly been a personal triumph for Leroy Gordon Cooper, the youngest of the original 7 astronauts.
And it may well be a textbook pickup on the part of the Kearsarge.
Astronaut Gordon Cooper has just confirmed to Scotty Carpenter that his attitude control system fuel has been dumped, that is the residual fuel, and this is a normal procedure. Gordon Cooper has just reported he has a good main chute. The main parachute has deployed. The main parachute on Faith 7 has deployed, confirmed by Gordon Cooper. He confirms that his landing impact bag has been deployed. Everything on this reentry and landing is going just like clockwork.
Beneath him on the Pacific are the carrier Kearsarge, a number of other recovery ships.
Mercury Control, Gordon Cooper now is below 10,000 feet in his spacecraft, hanging beneath the red and white 63-foot ring sail parachute. He is beneath 10,000 feet, coming down toward the sea. We estimate that he is in the pre-planned recovery zone.
We're going to switch now from our CBS News headquarters to Joe Campbell, who is standing by to report from the carrier Kearsarge.
And a big cheer went up from the crowd here a moment ago on
This
the
is
Kearsarge that he's closer than he was the last time. Just off to my left of her, right directly ahead of the ship, you can see the orange chute coming down. It's gently falling. It's already entered through the clouds. Sailors are everywhere with cameras. They're all talking about how it's much closer than last time, that they can see it better. So it looks as though from our vantage point out here, this has been the most beautiful shot of all. And astronaut Gordon Cooper is on his way down now. We can see the capsule hanging under the chute. It's a beautiful sight as everybody dashes to areas where they can get a good picture. We expect it's going to take a few minutes now before he falls down in real close view. The choppers have gone out to the area of impact. I can see 1, 2, 3. Helicopters 1, 2, and 3 are out in the area. They're getting ready to pick up the capsule if necessary, or rather the astronaut if necessary. Get my board. That'll be helicopters 1, 2, and 3. The lead position is flown by Commander Mark R. Starr, and the co-pilot is Lieutenant J.G. Joseph Montanaro. They're out in the lead position. They have aboard Dr. Robert D. Bollinger. He's a captain in the Army. He will go down to Gordo if he needs assistance, and from all indications, it looks as though he will not need any help at all from the beauty of this shot. Just a few degrees off the port bow of the USS Kearsarge, the mighty K appears to have done it again, with Gordon Cooper gently descending now. There are 3 helicopters under him. The second helicopter is piloted by Lieutenant Commander Emilio Pete Massa, the co-pilot, Lieutenant George Dubois. Now this one has aboard a runner-up diver team in the event that they have to lend assistance to the first one. The first group of underwater demolition teams is headed up by Ronnie Salant. He's from Coronado, California. All the excitement here is something fierce. We have 3 helicopters, a standby one, number 53, flown by Lieutenant J.G. Gene Fogarty. He's from Morristown, Pennsylvania. The co-pilot is Lieutenant J.G. Earl Rogers II. He's from Orlando, Florida. The choppers are moving around. Helos have voice communication with Gordo, so it looks as though in just a few moments now it's going to be impact, splash. We can still see very clearly the capsule swinging gently underneath the chute. The helicopters are directly underneath. Now the ship is swinging. We're heading toward the impact area. More and more the ship is swinging around to where it's going to be dead ahead. Right now it's off the port bow just a degree or so. I'd see about 358 degrees. We're swinging. Now the ship is heading directly for the point of impact. It's just a few hundred feet, it appears to be, from this point, off the water. The crew is dashing to the various sides of the ship to take a good look. Astronaut reports he's in fine shape. Just as we predicted a moment ago, it looks as though he's going to need little, if any, help. Now, here comes, there's the splash. The chute's breaking off to the side. The choppers are swinging around, and obviously this is a much better shot than last time. You can hear the shout go up from the crew. I'm going to move around now to the starboard side of the ship because apparently we're going to swing right by and pick up the capsule in just a little bit. So I'm moving over and going through to the starboard side of the ship, which is just as full of spectators and sailors as the port side had been. It's a good thing this is a big ship, because with the rushing sailors and officers and spectators lined up on one side, you'd think it would capsize. But of course it's a big ship and that's not about to happen. We're now heading towards the capsule, which is in the water. We can see the helicopters swinging down real close. Apparently in just a few moments, divers from the number 1 helicopter will jump in the water, maybe 15, 20 feet, and they'll begin attaching the flotation collar. One is swinging down very, very close now to the water. We can't see, of course, from this distance which chopper it is, but I feel pretty sure it's the number 1 helicopter, because that's the one whose business it is to drop divers, and also the doctor who's riding along, if his services should be called upon. But the word from Gordo in the capsule to the chopper pilots who are above is that he's feeling fine. And the guys here on the ship are all saying that this is a better shot than last time. And that's pretty hard to take when you consider the last one was nearly perfect. This one, I don't know the distance yet. In just a moment, I expect someone will tell us what the exact distance was that Gordo came down within the Kearsarge ballpark. Now the choppers are throwing up water on both sides. It was approximately 2 miles, which is cutting the old distance in half. Now you can see the spray coming up from the water as the choppers let down real close. Now that 2-mile approximation was by radar. The radar boys tell me it was 2 miles off to the port bow. When he first broke through the clouds, there was a mighty cheer went up. A few moments before then, we had heard the boom, and everyone says that means he's coming. They had heard it before, and they're all just cheering, and they've got quite a few types of laughs going on. One fellow saying, wee-hee-hee. He's telling his feelings in a laugh. Now the choppers are spreading out. One is remaining right above.
Let me interrupt that report from Joe Campbell just briefly to tell you that the landing occurred at 6:24 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and the total time of the flight was 34 hours, 20 minutes, 30 seconds, just about a minute longer than had been estimated in advance. Now back to Joe Campbell.
Gradually closing the distance. It's now about 8,800 yards, I'm told, to the spot where Gordo is sitting in the capsule. And as he said, feeling fine. Helo number 1 has already let go of the divers, and they're attaching the flotation collar right now. In a moment, we should get a better view from where we are. The sun is shining brilliantly out here. There are some scattered clouds, but it didn't, as we predicted, and as the meteorologist told us earlier, wouldn't interfere with recovery in the slightest. This is a great testimony to the technology of all the thousands of people involved, from Cape Canaveral, the various industries that go to make up this work in MA9. Much better than the last one. Now we see a plane coming in. Apparently it's one of the ship's own planes. One of the Sky Raiders took off just a little while ago. It's now returning. I don't know whether they're going to bring him aboard or not. I doubt it. He's probably going to stay around in the area. The smoke signal is getting closer now from the spot where the capsule is located. The ship is closing the distance. In a moment, we'll get you an exact distance on where we are. The haze is the smoke from the capsule, of course, as we pointed out a moment ago, the smoke marker. Charlie, would you find out just what the distance is right about now? I'm a poor judge of distance. I would say it's closing down to possibly 6,000 or 7,000 yards, no more, surely. We're looking off now. We're making a circle coming in on the smoke marker. The choppers are circling the area. We have 3 helicopters out there. One's remaining off.
Astronaut wants to be picked up by the boat crane on number 3.
The astronaut has just passed the word to the helicopter crews. He wants to be picked up by the boat crane at number 3 elevator. This means, according to the NASA doctors, that one very important part of this flight will be checked out very thoroughly. That is, that when the capsule is brought aboard the elevator, Cooper will be given various tests, such as his blood pressure and so on, while inside the capsule. Then he'll move out onto the deck of the ship, and an extension cord will be attached to his suit, which leads inside to the various instruments, which will also record a second reading of such things as pulse rate and heartbeat and blood pressure and so on. We're about 5,000 yards from the smoke marker now. It looks like a beautiful recovery. We're all hoping that no hitch develops at this stage of the game. We couldn't take it. I can see the capsule now bobbing within the area of the smoke marker. The ship is coming around in a gentle circle. There's no speed now involved in our approach. We're taking our time. Captain Rankin is very anxious that the Mighty K will come off with a second recovery effort just as successful as the Giraffe flight. The choppers are moving back towards the smoke marker. Now we're down to 3,700 yards. We're getting closer to that smoke marker. I can see the capsule very clearly in the water, and the choppers are moving around in various directions. I wish I could tell you what they're doing, but I'm sure they know what they're doing. The divers are in the water. In a moment, we're going to be bringing the capsule aboard the number 3 elevator. The crane will swing out, they'll pick them up, and that'll be recovery number 2 for the Mighty K. A message is being written out, I assume, for me. We are coming the downwind side. That's the way they did it last time, to keep the wind from interfering with the capsule, which is reasonably helpless now as it sits out there in the water and bobs like a cork. The ship is listing to starboard due to all the sailors and spectators, so I was right. I did say earlier that it was too big a ship for this to happen, but I wondered why we had this slight starboard list, and it's true. We are listing because all the sailors have run over to the starboard side for a better view, and of course you can see cameras by the hundreds, perhaps even thousands. Would you say there are thousands of cameras out here? Some fellas are wearing 2 and 3. So all the folks back home will have beautiful shots taken aboard the Mighty K when they recovered astronaut Gordon Cooper. Helicopter number 1 is hovering almost directly overhead the capsule. That's piloted by Commander Mark Starr, who headed up the helicopter group. He's the commanding officer of the Hezron 6. Is this true? He's not, huh? He's the executive officer of Hezron 6. The group that took my cap while I wasn't looking and sewed on their emblems, because during the Carpenter flight I picked up a helicopter squadron cap there. The officer who heads up this helicopter squadron, this is the new SH-3A jet helicopter of the type the President uses. It has a boat configuration so that if it should have to come down into the water, they can keep their rotors going and remain afloat. The group is commanded by Commander Ralph R. Riley of Andalusia, Alabama. So his group is out here, Hezron 6. They're doing a good job. They're gently circling the area. We're now coming on the upwind side to create a situation that would be better for the astronauts. You can see the green dye now. The green dye marker is visible, whereas only a little while ago we could see the smoke. Now we're swinging around again, making a wide arc. Apparently we're coming in directly. Are we going to put a boat out in the water? We are going to put a boat out in just a little bit. This will be a boat crew. May as well tell you some of the fellas in that boat crew while we're waiting and circling the capsule out there in the water. Lieutenant J.G. William A. Andre of Inglewood, California, is heading up the boat division. His assistant boat officer is Kenneth R. Perotti, boatswain's mate first class of Wilmington, California. The bow hook, Tom Templeton. He's a boatswain's mate third class. They used to call that coxswain when I was in the Navy. From Quebec, Tennessee. Engineer Billy D. Francisco. He's from Rado, Colorado. And then we have a signalman aboard, Clyde Roberts. He's a signalman third class from Atlanta, Georgia. And then Rayburn Weaver, coxswain, is aboard. He's from Montgomery, Alabama. So this boat crew will be getting into the water here very shortly. Now you can see a large area of the green dye marker. It's beautiful out here. No wind to bother to any degree at all. The sun is shining brightly. You can see the smoke smoke marker swinging up from the green dye. It's a strange sight if you've never seen it before. All eyes are pinned on that area so that we're going to see everything we can possibly see. The goony birds are flying around in gentle arc, looking as though they too were waiting for the capsule to land, and have been waiting all along. We're holding right now. There goes a red marker, a red smoke marker. It's about 3,400 yards off on our starboard, just about the beam. We're swinging around. There's the red marker, the smoke coming up. You can see the yellow of the flotation collar around the capsule. The helicopter is hovering over top. We're still swinging around in a wide circle. Apparently they're getting ready to launch a boat. No indication yet that we're launching it. But we're getting very much closer before we launch it. I understand that's the word. But it's a beautiful sight to look out there and see this indigo Pacific. Just a touch of white caps here and there, the albatross circling around, and down below the helicopters we see the beautiful capsule with a flotation gear attached, and we're seeing various color dyes come off now and then. But Gordo says everything was fine. We're just circling around. It may take a little bit, but we're going to take every care, as I understand it, to make sure that no hitch develops during this somewhat delicate recovery operation. Nobody wants anything to go wrong at this stage of the game. It's been going too well before. I'm sure it must have been a thrill to Herb Caplow when he was out here in the Pacific before to see this sight that I'm now witnessing for the first time. When we were picking up Scott Carpenter, he was some 200 miles away from us. This is the first time that I have had the pleasure of reporting a capsule in the water from a successful flight, especially one with such a long duration. I was just told that green and red flare in those two, in that order, meant that everything was fine, and he wanted to be picked up by the boat and by the crane and be hoisted aboard number 3 elevator, a prearranged signal. It's now about 3,100 yards off from our starboard bow, and I would say somewhere roughly 35, 40 degrees, huh? 30 degrees off to our starboard bow. Now we're getting close enough to almost read the lettering. We can read the lettering on a couple of the helicopters that are constantly circling in a gentle hovering action. This is to keep everything well within sight. The divers are in the water with the capsule. I can see one of them on the flotation gear from this distance. I don't know which one it is, of course. It's 3,000 yards. It's pretty hard to tell faces. But we do see the divers bobbing around. They're on the flotation gear. We're now turning so that we're beginning to get a little wind into the microphone. We'll keep it covered with a hand, if possible, so that we can describe all the action that's coming from out here. I'll say again. I understand the maneuver of the ship was so that the capsule would be set in a direction by the wind which would lead it towards us. We're now closing in the gap. We're at 2,500 yards. 2 helicopters have departed, moved over directly in front of the ship, and only one remains over the capsule. Now I can see 2 of the divers around the flotation gear. Let's go into that diver team while we're waiting here for recovery. We have Rado He's a shipbuilder first class. He's the team leader. He's flying out of California. Then assisting Ronnie is Bert Swift. He's a radioman second class working in this underwater demolition team. He's from Alamosa, California. Then we have Richard H. Nicholson, they call him. He's a first officer. He's from Colorado Springs, Colorado. So these boys...
I'm afraid we'd better interrupt that signal from the aircraft carrier Kearsarge. It was excellent to begin with, but obviously as the ship turned into the wind, it deteriorated somewhat. But this was a report on a great moment in the American space program, the safe and successful landing of astronaut Gordon Cooper on the Pacific about 80 miles southeast of Midway after 22 orbits around the world. His total time was 34 hours, 20 minutes, 30 seconds, and his splashdown time was 6:24 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. He left Cape Canaveral aboard his spacecraft, lifted into orbit by the Atlas booster at 8:04 a.m. yesterday morning, Eastern Standard Time. Now he's coming down. He has come down in the Pacific, and the carrier is moving rapidly to pick him up. Another great success for the carrier Kearsarge. which also recovered astronaut Schirra. Now let's go again to Joe Campbell on the Kearsarge.
But it is out here. Your eyes play tricks on you in the Pacific, as I learned a long time ago. But it's very clearly visible. The yellow flotation gear around the capsule. The swells are not too much. They tell me in the meteorology office, where Commander Bill Mellinger works, that the swells are running about 4 to 6 feet. Very gentle for this type of action. They tell me there's a school of porpoise. Where? Which way? Which direction? Oh, yes. This is were they there the last time? We have a school of porpoises out there in amongst the green dye that's still remaining in the water. Now we're closing in the distance very rapidly. It seems we're down to 1,500.
Colonel Powers just reported to us from Mercury Control that astronaut Cooper has reported from inside the spacecraft that he is resting comfortably. He has preferred to remain inside the spacecraft while the recovery is made. Let's go back again now and see how that signal is from the Kearsarge as reported by Joe Campbell.
Looks to me like about 1,100 yards. We're circling now that the wind is in our face. That's so that the capsule will drift towards us. It's a definite maneuver. They're getting ready to launch the boat now, which should be taking off in just a moment. I don't see the boat on the elevator. I see it's on the port side. They're going to launch the boat from the port side. It seems like they can almost let the hook down. We're coming on them so gently now. We get dumped on there, let the hook down so that we can pick them all up. The distance couldn't be very much at all. I don't know what the distance is, but I'd say it's not more than 800 yards. We're coming in very close. And that is a diver on the flotation gear. The range has been lost on radar. That means that we are now eyeballing very well. The one that cut the radar off. The big one is still swinging around, but that's to help the various planes in the area. There are all kinds of Air Force planes, airfield rescue teams, paramedics on board those space. Those that have overshot or undershot the barricade.
While we wait for the Kearsarge to complete the pickup of astronaut Cooper and his spacecraft, we might tell you that there's a very exuberant scene inside Mercury Control, as reported a few moments ago by Shorty Powers. The Mercury Control room, a large room in which there are banks of instruments, complicated